All right. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good. My name's Niigaan Sinclair, and I'm, honestly, I don't think this is working. Okay, perfect. My name's Niigaan. It's nice to see everybody. And we're here at Father John Redmond. Is that right? Yeah? And what grades are you guys? 10s, 12s, 11s. There are the whole gamut here. Wonderful. All right, so my name's Niigaan, and I'm a columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press, which is a newspaper. I just came from doing CBC national news, which is just this morning, and then CTV. And so I do a lot of stuff in the media. None of you probably read newspapers. None of you probably watch news. You probably watch these things on your phones, probably little clips on YouTube, probably more than anyone else. So feel free to Google me if you'd like, and you'll see that there are hundreds of videos about different things that I speak about. I talk about Indigenous issues. I'm actually heading to Ottawa tomorrow to do the national coverage for CBC on Orange Shirt Day on Parliament Hill. And so I'll be there for 3 hours tomorrow. And there's only one more video. It really doesn't matter. Go if you want. So it's so glittery. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today, or really tomorrow, but for those of you that are going to be wearing an orange shirt for the next day or so, why is it that we're doing this? And then most importantly, what are we doing here by talking about something that happened a very long period of time ago and how it does impact today? So the reason I want you to see that video is because I want you to see your relatives. I want you to see what's happening in Canadian cities right now, which is that there is a group of people who have been targeted, who have been attacked, and who have been left outside sleeping in minus 50 degree weather. Now, it's not minus 50 degrees right now. In fact, you in Toronto probably don't even get that cold. But for a long period of time, we have treated a group of people very poorly in this country, and we have created a huge problem for all of us as a result. Meaning that it doesn't matter what industry you're about to go into, whether you're a doctor, lawyer, dentist, teacher, business owner, just a parent, that's probably the hardest job of all, is being a parent. You will have to face this issue. You will have to make decisions on this issue. You'll have to be competent on this issue. If you're going to do investor stuff down on Bay Street in Toronto, or whether you're going to be a person working in lumber, or you're going to be a person working in, pick any single job you can possibly, a Subway sandwich maker, whatever you are going to do in your career, this is the most important issue today of what I'm about to talk to you about. More important than math, more important than science, because all of those things, while important, you cannot do them unless you can work with other people. Now, you may notice I have a little issue with my foot here. I'm fine, I'm just healing. Unfortunately, I have to wear this stupid boot for a couple weeks, so if I limber around, I'm fine, don't worry about it. But these are some of the things that I do. Now, I'm also a professor at the University of Manitoba. And so I teach classes like this almost every day, a couple hundred people sitting in a big theater like this, and we often talk about kind of where are we at. So over the next day or so, September 30th, tomorrow, you'll see people all around the city, all around the province, and you yourself will probably be invited to wear an orange shirt or a ribbon or an orange pin of some kind. Are you doing that here? So can people, instead of they can wear orange shirts tomorrow? Yeah. Okay, wonderful, great. So tomorrow you'll get a chance to wear an orange shirt. Now, some of you probably know the story of why it's Orange Shirt Day, but I'll just do a quick little version so that you can know about why is it that we wear orange shirts on September 30th. So a long time ago, starting in about the late 1890s, 1900, there were schools that were designed for Indigenous peoples in which children would be taken from their families, from their communities, from their territories, and then put into situations in which they were taught that everything about their cultures, languages, was wrong, and that they had to stop speaking their languages, stop doing their traditions, like such as having long hair or seeing their elders or their community as valuable, and their teachings, their songs, their traditions, all of those things weren't allowed. And instead, what was replaced with is a long period or a very substantial period in which they were taught very different things, different than what they are. Not that they weren't, some things were valuable. For instance, people learned certain skills, or people learned certain, for instance, languages, English or French. It's just that it was at the cost of something else. And those children would be taken from their families at September 30th. They would be, usually a police officer would show up, or sometimes a person from the church would show up, because the different churches across the country ran the schools. The Catholic schools, or the Catholic Church, ran the most amount of schools, about 70% of them. Stand here with this microphone right here. Okay. Is that better for you guys? Is that better when I use that? And September 30th was the day in which many families would dread. It would be very hard, because sending your child away to school, not just the mere fact that you wouldn't see them for numbers of months at a time, but for some families, many families, what happened at these schools sometimes wasn't always the most pleasant educational experience. And so many families felt very sad around September 30th. Now, one of those families was the parents or the grandparents of a young woman named Phyllis Webstat. And Phyllis was getting very sad on September 30th, and she would be missing her mom and her dad and her family, and her grandparents particularly, who she really loved, and her grandmother in particular. And so her grandmother gave her an orange shirt to wear at the school, so that she would always remember home. Now, when she got to the school, she, like most students, had her bag, and the staff at the school took her items, her things, and they took much of her clothes. And like most students, they had other things to wear, uniforms and so on. But Phyllis never saw that orange shirt ever again. And it made her very sad, made her very depressed, and also made her long for home even more. Now, she told that story to many people in an audience just like this, and she started to talk a little bit about residential schools. Now, you probably all learned about residential schools at some point, so I don't really want to rehash that policy, but has everybody learned a little bit about residential schools in your education? Can I just get sort of like a little wave of your hand if you've heard about it? Okay, so you've heard about it. Okay, now here's the really great news, and we're going to talk about you guys in just a minute. My generation, and I'm 49, that means I'm 30 years ahead of you, 33, 34 years ahead of you, never heard a word about this. We never talked about it, and we certainly never saw it in things like textbooks or school. So the fact that most of you have heard about it, or all of you perhaps, is telling me that there is something very important going on, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But when Phyllis started to talk about her experience at residential schools, which, if you've learned about it, you know is very hard. There was very many complicated things that happened. In some cases, some students experienced some great violence, and they also experienced a great deal of loneliness. And in some cases, there were some dangerous situations at those schools as well that harmed individuals. And so Phyllis started to tell her story, and she talked about this across the country. And then she'd always end her talk by saying, "I wonder what happened to that orange shirt. I'd always love to find out what happened to my grandmother's orange shirt that she gave me." And then one day, a small group of people, 3, 4, 5 people who had heard Phyllis speak before, they decided to come to her event and wear an orange shirt. And she looked up and she said, "I really appreciate that. Thank you for showing that the story I'm saying has meaning for you, that you care too." And then Phyllis did a talk the next week, and then it wasn't just a few people, but it was also now 20, 30 people. And then pretty soon, half the audience. And then one day Phyllis walked in, and she was giving a talk, and she noticed the entire audience had orange shirts on. And Phyllis, too, decided to wear an orange shirt as well. And at the end of her talk, what she said was, it's not just good enough that we do this here, that we wear an orange shirt together and we say, we recognize this is an important story that all people in Canada should know about, but let's go out and talk about it with other people on the streets, in coffee shops, in malls, in schools, in boardrooms, all across the country. And so everybody got up and then they walked around the neighborhood. And when people saw this huge group of people wearing orange shirts, they said, oh, what's that about? Like, why, what's with the orange? And people started to ask questions. And then awareness started to become cognizant of Orange Shirt Day. And that's how the movement started. Soon enough, it was not just a town, but then a province, British Columbia. And then eventually, people started to hear about it during a movement called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which were holding hearings across the country. And they were headed up by my father. My father is the late Senator and head commissioner of the TRC, Niigaan Sinclair, if you know who that is. Now, I tell you that because there's a reason, oh, I keep forgetting my computer's over here. There's a reason that we wear orange shirts. Oh, sorry. Because we're recognizing that this was an important time, and to survivors like Phyllis, here's Phyllis right here, it means a lot. So for a lot of us who are intergenerational survivors, what that means is that we have either parents or grandparents that attended the schools. That means that at the age of 5, our parent or our grandparent didn't get a chance to learn how to be loved, didn't get a chance to learn about our own community and our own culture. And that means that a lot of our parents and grandparents grew up with a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment when it came to Indigenous culture and tradition. And also, it wasn't just Indigenous peoples that grew up with that kind of shame. It was also Canadians who saw what Indigenous peoples were doing or taught that what Indigenous peoples were doing was somehow different or wrong or not acceptable. Like, for example, one of the things that happened, although it seems very odd now because you're all from a different generation, but when I was growing up, certainly men didn't have long hair. Or if you did, you were a troublemaker of some kind. And my dad had a beautiful braid, just like this, just like I used to have a beautiful braid. And oftentimes people would make fun of or judge my father when he would be walking in a mall, for example. And so I can remember being a young boy, and while my father at home would have his braid out and would be wearing it, whenever we would go to the mall, he would always tuck it underneath his jacket because it would be something that he didn't want to draw attention so that people perhaps would follow us or judge us in the mall when all we wanted to do was buy some things. That's just one example of many different examples. For instance, many of us didn't learn that Winnipeg, the city that we grew up in, or Manitoba, or Toronto, these are all Indigenous words. We never learned that either. And we never learned that Indigenous peoples invented everything that this country really has ever done, like democracy and healthcare and multiculturalism. These are Indigenous ideas. Indigenous peoples are the ones who invited the newcomers in and said everybody matters here. And as I began to become a little bit more aware of this growing up, I started to notice that change is happening very quickly because of you, because of the people who are learning more things than any other generation in history has learned. And this brings me to you now. I want you to see the movement of Orange Shirt Day, of what it's becoming. This is a little video that was taken by my good friend in APTN in Winnipeg. Don't worry too much about the sound.
At St. John's Park in Winnipeg, thousands of people have come out to honor National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The march started at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and made its way down Main Street and in here at the park. Leading that march was a young man named Tatum. He was marching for his grandfather, who was a residential school survivor. Lots of people still coming into the park today. It's quite incredible just how many people are here. One gentleman that I spoke with said that this was the biggest crowd he had ever seen for Indigenous people since the Tina Fontaine marches. Lots of stories from survivors today, and we'll have some of those stories for you tomorrow at 5. I'm Michelle Karlenzig, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
So you can just see a bit of an example of the different movement that happens all across Winnipeg particularly. But I'll tell you what happened, 48 hours ago. This is actually from previous years. I'm going to do this instead here because we can actually see everybody's. Sorry, that's my daughter right there. All right, here you go. I'm going to show you a few examples. This is what happened 48 hours ago. 48 hours ago at the, a lot of people in Toronto don't watch this, but it's the CFL. Anyone heard of the Canadian Football League? You heard of that? Okay. People in Toronto, not that big a deal. Manitoba, humongous deal. Everybody comes out to these things. We had 35,000 fans at the stadium recognizing Indigenous peoples. We brought them for the coin toss at halftime. We brought in thousands of fans from the north, from many of these young people from First Nations communities. Many of them are under boil water advisories. Almost every single one of them had fire impact this year, meaning that their community was surrounded by forest fire. Over half of them, for sure, lost their homes. They had them burnt down. They were destroyed. They lived in hotels. Most of them had to finish their year last year from May onwards, May and June, in a hotel lobby. Like, could you finish your school in a hotel lobby? It would be kind of nice to be in a hotel room for, a weekend maybe, but try living with your brother, sister, your parents, maybe your grandparents, all in one hotel room and try to do your homework. It's not easy. And so what happened at last game, and I'm just trying to find a good picture other than me getting lost in the airport yesterday. Oh, here we go. Was 35,000 people joining together and recognizing that we're all in this together. We had jiggers that opened up the day. We had POW dancers at halftime, 50 of them, the most we've ever had in history. And 35,000 people watched Winnipeg play against Hamilton. These are the fire-impacted families that came down to recognize, and for all of them, they had been their very first game that they had ever experienced. The reason I bring that up to you is because something interesting is happening. Something, there's like a tipping point moment. There are more people tomorrow wearing orange shirts than ever in history. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians will wear an orange shirt tomorrow. It used to just be a small group of 4 or 5 at the back of a podium, of a theater just like this. And it's now moving into a national, international movement. There are orange shirt days in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in England, all across Germany, Portugal, Spain. There's even Orange Shirt Day events happening in Africa, recognizing the experience of Indigenous peoples here in this country. And while those events are happening for the very first time this year, this is what it's going to look like tomorrow on Treaty 1 where I come from. This was my daughter's school. My daughter, this is a couple years ago, my daughter is at the University of Ottawa. And so she's 19, and now she's in the orchestra in Ottawa. But what her school has done every single year for 10 years now is there's a former residential school site in their community, just a few blocks away from their school. And so what they do is they go to the site of where that school stood, and they surround it, and they do a small ceremony. They all together recognize the harms, the experiences of residential schools, and then most importantly, that all of them, that's all of our history. It isn't just Indigenous history, that's Canadian history. Because it wasn't just about Indigenous peoples being taught to feel ashamed, like my father in the mall hiding his braid. It was also about the shop owner that he would walk into who might judge him. It was also the people in the mall who didn't understand that hair is a sacred expression of Indigenous peoples. It was also about all the different people that my father would interact with as a judge, as a lawyer, as a politician, as a person who works in the politics. And now, here his son is, that I work with you today, that all of this is our history. So we should learn about it. We should learn about who we are, and we shouldn't just always start every conversation on the belief that one group of people matter and the other group of people don't. Now, let me try this out for you. Hey, you all remember grade 6? Remember grade 6? Yeah? For some of you, it wasn't that long ago. For me, it was a while ago. Now, do you remember that activity where the teacher walked in the room and handed out the maps? It's okay, everybody, pull out your pencil crayons. Let's color Canada. Remember that? Okay, well, how many colors would you need to color Canada? Land and water, usually 2 colors, right? Land, water, okay? And then if you did provinces and territories, how many provinces, how many territories? And your social studies teachers are listening very closely right now. Yep. 10 provinces, 3 territories. Now, I have some news for you. If you're old like me, it was 10 provinces and 2 territories. Because Nunavut, the territory that exists now in the north, didn't exist when I was in school. You remember that? Or who's old over here? Like, who's old like me? Exactly. Right? Now, do you know why Nunavut became a territory? It's because the Cold War. It's because Russia was claiming the north because there's oil there, but there's also military purposes there. And the United States and Russia have been in a conflict for a very long period of time. They still are in that conflict now, but they used to call it the Cold War. Anyone heard of the Cold War? It was basically a competition between Russia, who represented kind of a socialist communist vision, and then the United States, who sort of represented a democratic vision, sort of. Anyways, my point of it is that the United States was very nervous when Russia started moving their boats and their submarines into the Arctic, and they said, oh, well, we were here first. Now, for a long time, Canada didn't see Indigenous peoples as really being very valuable or having any purpose or doing things like land claims. They would often call us nomads. I actually remember that in my textbook. They'd say Indigenous peoples are like nomads. They never had land that they lived on. They lived everywhere. They just floated all over the place, which is not true. Indigenous peoples always had permanent homes. It just might have been only for 6 months instead of for 20 years. We would live by the river for 6 months. We would live over here on the plains for 6 months, hunting bison. We lived over here collecting medicines for 6 months. That's permanency. It just happens to be the bedroom and the living room. Like if you lived, for example, if you slept in your living room for a week, and then you moved to your bedroom for 6 months, and then you slept downstairs in the basement for 2 months, no one would ever call you a nomad. They would say you're just using your house. And for Indigenous peoples, we moved all the time, but we had permanent places to be. Now, for a long time, Canada said, oh, Indigenous peoples are just nomads. They have no sense of land, no sense of relationship, no government, no writing, nothing. Then Russia came along. And Russia started claiming the north. And so Canada went, oh, we need to prove that someone in this country had been there before the Russians in order for Canada to claim it. And so the Inuit people were like, we've been there every single year whaling and hunting seals. And here's all the evidence. We have all these stories. We have all this presence. We know everything about the icebergs, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Inuit people were like, hello, we've been doing this for thousands of years. And Canada's like, great. We now recognize that you have historical use and occupancy of lands. And that, of course, then led to the territory of Nunavut. Now you're saying to yourself, why is Niigaan giving us this little geography lesson? Well, I have some news for you, everybody. See this little spot right here? See that little island right there? So one of the things that Justin Trudeau did in his last moment as Prime Minister is he recognized that the Haida people, who are Indigenous nation in BC, have ownership over their own lands. Now, one of the reasons he did that is because Justin Trudeau has a very close relationship with the Haida people. He grew up partly there. He has a very nice, good, long-standing relationship, and they've been in court for a long time, and BC doesn't have treaties, meaning that there isn't pre-existing claims by the Crown on the lands. Don't mean to get too deep dive in you. Here's my point, though. Do you know what we just saw the birth of? It's going to take about 10 years. The 4th territory. So guess what? You know how you all feel like you're all sharp? You're like, oh, 10 provinces, 3 territories. One day you're going to be standing in front of a group of people and say, I remember when, back in the old days, when we had 10 provinces and 3 territories. Just like how old I feel right now by going 10. Here's my point, is that the Canadian map is always shifting, and at the center of that shifting is Indigenous peoples. Let me give you some other examples. As Canada begins to embody reconciliation, the returning of land to Indigenous peoples is happening more and more and more. Most oftentimes because Canada has never given the land that they promised 150 years ago. And so there's many treaties that are in the courts right now where there is land now being given back to Indigenous peoples. And there are small plots now, but they're turning bigger and bigger and bigger. Or if Indigenous peoples can't have access to their traditional territories, let's say there's a city right there, Indigenous peoples will get a big compensation package, usually money, and that money will then create business. So one of the biggest businesses that are created in Winnipeg is called the Niigaan project, where Indigenous peoples are getting a big, huge piece of land right in the downtown of Winnipeg. And do you know what they're building? Anyone want to guess what Indigenous peoples are building? You're like, some people were worried that Indigenous peoples would build, I don't know, things that people didn't want. I don't know, like, there's a bunch of stereotypes of what that could be. Here's what Indigenous peoples are building: a hockey rink, a water park, a conference center, a hotel, a hospital. All of those things everybody's going to benefit from. And so what you've learned is something really critically important, which is that when Indigenous peoples succeed and when justice occurs, everybody benefits. But when Canada is unjust, meaning taking the land, and for a long time ignoring that Indigenous peoples have any value or that they can contribute, we get into a lot of conflict. It's very expensive. We could talk about child welfare or justice, but I'm just going to tell you about this. Now, we remember going back to, how many pencil crowns do you need for 10 provinces, 3 territories? You actually need 14, because 10 provinces, 3 territories, 1 water. Right, don't forget the water. You got to color the water, right? So 14 colors. Well, here's my question for you. If I said, hey, everybody, why don't we learn about Indigenous nations too? And that we can learn about Canada through the people who weren't just here from 1867 onwards, but they've been here for thousands of years. My question is, do you have enough pencil crayons? Now, this is from a website called nativeland.ca. When you color Indigenous nations, what you realize is something really profound. First of all, Canada doesn't start in 1867. Like, for example, Toronto is an Indigenous word. Many words that you are living in towns and roads are named by Indigenous peoples, people like Tecumseh or Tenskwatawa or Pontiac, also named after a car. Now, what you'll notice is that all the major roads of every single Canadian city are Indigenous trading routes. Indigenous peoples traveled them first. Europeans didn't just make those up. When they arrived, Indigenous peoples did them first. And then you realize something really profound. Look at all these Indigenous nations. Notice how they all have different colors and they overlap. So Indigenous nations have this crazy idea that we can share land and not kill each other. Now, most oftentimes we did this because usually we were sharing certain resources like water or medicines, but particularly on the prairies where I come from, the bison. So the bison doesn't recognize, would be like, here's our border, there's their border. No, the bison are like, blah, 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 blah. And so Indigenous peoples have to figure out a way to be, and we certainly it wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes we warred, but then what would happen at the end is we would say, okay, well, let's share this resource, and we have to live together for certain months, times of the year. And we have to figure out a way to not kill each other, so we got to get along. And one of the things that we often did was we created treaty. And treaty was the agreement to share space together and for our children to meet each other. What they would often say, Indigenous peoples would say to Europeans or to other Indigenous nations, have your children stay with us for a while. We will teach them about how to live here, where the food is, where the medicines are, and that we will send our children to you and you will teach our children. And one of the great things about when kids meet is they learn about each other, they work together, some of them date. And next thing you know, I don't want to war against you because you're my sister. Because our children have married. And that's treaty. That's what the point of a treaty. Treaty was supposed to never create Indigenous and Canadian. It was supposed to be everybody together. Everybody in this thing all the time. That's what it's supposed to be. Now, if you look here, where did multiculturalism come from? Where did the idea that we all live together, learn about each other? That's an Indigenous idea. Where did the idea that every single person, even if we disagree, live in a society in which we all get to have a say? Like when Europeans arrived here, the only people who had a say in anything is the Pope and the King. But yet suddenly Europeans went, let's try to make something different. Let's try to make a government where everybody gets to have a vote every 4 years on who's the government. Or if we decide together, we can also decide on certain property ownership or make decisions collectively together. All of those things are who we are. Or how about this? If we put all of our meat or our medicines or our riches in a pile, like our furs, and then we share, we make sure every single person has a little bit. If you can see this tradition today with certain ceremonies and lodges, if you go to a ceremony, we always feed the elders first, and then we feed the children second, then we feed the women, then we feed the men. Everybody gets fed. The only rule of the feast is that the last person to eat is the chief. Imagine if the mayor of your town was the last person to eat. You'd cure homelessness overnight. And that's why in Indigenous communities, traditionally, there was no homelessness. There was no poverty. And apparently, that's what Canada is supposed to be. Apparently, we live in a society in which we're supposed to care for everybody. We have things that can help people when they lose their job. We have systems and homes that can help, that all of us pay for with our tax dollars. But also, the most important expression of all is that if you get sick, if you get a terrible disease, if you get in a car accident, you don't have to worry about paying for it. That's the difference between us and the United States. That if you go to a hospital, you're going to pay for our brother over here who's in this car accident. And you pay for that when you pay your taxes at the cash register, when you buy something, or your parents pay your income taxes, or the government raises money by revenues on certain things like oil and gas. They put all that money in a pile and they pay for when you get in a car accident or you get sick or you get a terrible disease or whatever that might be. That's called healthcare. And that's an Indigenous idea too. Europeans didn't have anything to do with any of that until they learned about it when they got here. Now my point of it is you'd learn that in grade 6. But I'm going to bet that you did this map probably every day of your life in school. How many of you ever, that was my terrible segue. You've probably done this map every day of your life, right? How many of you have ever seen this map before? How many of you have seen this map though? Put your hand up. Yeah, you've all seen this map every single day of your life. You obsess about this map, but you never learn about this. And here's my point, is that we have learned that some people matter and some people don't. We've learned that some ideas of community matter and they're the contributing ones, and some don't. This is a big problem, because what's happened is that you are being shaped into creating a country that will not always be able to come up with the solutions that we need from you. Now, you are the most competent generation in history, don't get me wrong. You have learned to see things in ways that we've never seen them before. And predominantly, you've been taught to see things in much different ways because of these phones in your pockets, because of these amazing teachers that you have. So you're learning more things than ever. But we have so many pressing issues in front of us. And here they are. The four most important issues that you're going to deal with in your life is we have to build an economy, we have to save the environment, we have to stop blaming each other for our national problems and blaming particularly a couple groups of people as saying, oh, they're the problems. And then lastly is we have to answer the real hard question of what kind of country do we want to build? What kind of country do we want to build in the future? Do we want to build a country full of jails, conflict, and fights over land? Or do we want to build a country with universities, with beautiful buildings and streets, and that we can get along together? It's a pretty simple choice. If we want to build a country full of conflict, then we just keep going the way we are now. If we want to build a country that's going to be inclusive, bring everybody in, and going to be more powerful than ever to withstand the American president saying we're going to be the 51st state, we have to do something different. And here's what we got to do. We got to come together. These are the treaty medals right here. These are the medals that were supposed to be the vision between Indigenous peoples and Canadians. But it hasn't been that way. It was supposed to be about giving gifts, like looking like this. Being at the same level, shaking hands, offering gifts, agreeing to build the land together. See the little hatchet between the two of them? That's what it's supposed to be. So that means that if you're going to be a business owner, if you're going to be a stockbroker, if you're going to be a person who's going to have influence in your community as a dentist, lawyer, doctor, nurse, teacher, whatever profession it's going to be, working with Indigenous peoples is the most important way to build this country. And if it's math and science and ELA and writing an essay and writing a letter and learning about history, those are all important things. But if you only learn that one group of people matters and the other group of people doesn't, then we will never achieve the vision of what this country can be. And here's what it looks like. This is what it could look like. So this is in Saskatoon. That's 4,000 people dancing together. And they're dancing in a ceremony called the Round Dance. These are Indigenous peoples and Canadians joining together, holding each other's hand, moving along a journey in a mall on December 17th of 2011. Notice that at the one time we're supposed to be, or we're taught that we're supposed to be buying everything around Christmas time or holiday time, depending on what religion you are. Notice that nobody's buying a thing. What people are doing is committing to a relationship together. In the one place we're taught that if you don't have money, you don't belong here. We can be anything possible. And the truth is, you guys, you're going to have to face a real hard moment in your future. And it's about it starts with wearing an orange shirt tomorrow. Indigenous peoples are growing exponentially faster than anybody else. And the Indigenous population in this country is growing so fast that it's growing faster than the rate of Canadians. So there's approximately 36 to 40 million Canadians. There's about 2 million Indigenous peoples, but they used to be under 1 million, about when I was your age. So we are growing 35% every 10 years. The Canadian population is only growing about 10%. So what the graph looks like, the blue graph is Canadians, and the biggest group of Canadians are between the ages of 35 and 59. That's your teachers. The biggest group of Indigenous peoples, though, are your age. See that red map, red graph just to the right there? What that means is that in the future, every industry, public or private, wherever you go, you're going to work with the largest group of Indigenous peoples ever. And these red dots here indicate to you where you will work with Indigenous peoples the most. So if you go to Winnipeg, 1/5 of us are Indigenous. That means that 20% of this audience would be Indigenous, and the rest of you would work with, live beside, or be married to an Indigenous person. Yes, Toronto, Southern Ontario, you don't have a big red dot like Winnipeg does, or Saskatoon, or Regina, or Edmonton, or Calgary, or Vancouver, or Thunder Bay, or Sudbury, or Sault Ste. Marie, but your little red dots are growing. So right now, you're like 1 in 15, 1 in 17 Indigenous peoples. But pretty soon, your children and your grandchildren will see and look what Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie looks like now. And then your great-great-grandchildren are going to look like how Winnipeg looks now. Every single one of us needs to know how to work together. That means the most employable skill that you need is to work with Indigenous peoples. And at the University of Manitoba, we've realized this fact. So if any of you decide to come to the University of Manitoba, or frankly, anywhere in the prairies, anywhere in BC, anywhere in northwestern Ontario, you're going to have to work with Indigenous peoples, and so we need to train and create spaces at our university for Indigenous peoples and Canadians to learn about each other, because they weren't always getting that in school. And if they do get it, what they often get is really simple stuff, like straightforward stuff, like residential schools, but you might not get taught that multiculturalism, democracy, healthcare comes from Indigenous people, so we have to teach that. And so we create spaces. We have buildings that are specifically building Indigenous peoples. We also are raising a generation of Indigenous leaders. These are our Indigenous leaders right here, young Indigenous leaders doing great undergraduate work. We now have a requirement that every single student at the University of Manitoba has to take 3 credit hours in Indigenous studies. And that means that when you come and you want to learn how to become a psychologist, a geographer, a historian, you have to learn about relationships with Indigenous peoples. And these are one of our students right here. So, this is Braden Harper. Braden was 20 years old, and he started working for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers way back in 2015. And what he started to say to the Bombers was, hey, you know what the story of football is? Does anyone ever watch football? Who likes football? You like football? What's the goal of football? Like, what's the purpose of it? Like, what are you trying to do? Get a touchdown, good. Or you can also get a field goal too, right? So how do you get a touchdown? You have a ball, right? Or it's not even a ball really, it's like a oval thing. And then what do you have to do with it? You throw it to someone or you carry it, and you have to carry it into someone else's territory, right? And then every time you get 5-6 yards, you do a little dance, right? Yeah. So you're telling me that every single time that, and by the way, when you go down the field to get into someone else's territory, is it because you ask them nicely? You say, oh, can I please come into your land? What do you have to do? You just hurt them. You push them aside, and you push them over, and sometimes you play a trick, like a trick play or something like that, right? Throw it to the running back throws it, and they're like, oh, that's a flea flicker, right? Right. So you're telling me that football is about stealing land? Is that what you're telling me? That's what the game is. And it's about taking land through brute force. And do we have any examples of history repeating that? Do we have any examples of Canada stealing land with force and brutality, unjustly, but getting rewarded with 7 points, or I guess 6 points, then you have to kick a field goal just to insult them a little bit? Oh, by the way, we really took the land here. So Braden started working for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and he said, hey, you know what? Football's about stealing land. We got some bad examples in our community about that. Maybe we should talk about sharing land. And so the Bombers made the first territorial acknowledgement ever, And they started doing all the things that you saw in the picture, bringing Indigenous fans to the game, saying we're going to actually physically share space with Indigenous peoples. Our 35,000 season ticket holders, they're going to spend time with Indigenous peoples. And for many of those Indigenous kids, it's the very first time they ever get out of their community. And one of the great things is they get to see a beautiful stadium, and they get to see people and meet people who don't always act, think, vote the same way. Everybody matters on that one day of Orange Shirt Day. Well, there's another team in Winnipeg. You may have heard of them, called the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets heard about what the Bombers did, and a few years later decided to do their own version. And they indigenized their logo. They brought a big drum to the games, and they did this.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Bell MTS Place welcome to the Strong Warrior Girls Anishinaabe singers who will perform our national anthem in Ojibwe.
You don't have to worry about standing up or anything, but it's O Canada in Ojibwe. So that, my friends, is 35, or sorry, not 35, 35 is the Bomber. 15,000 fans cheering for a language that the churches and the government once banned in school. It's 15,000 fans stepping up, saying, we belong together, and the only way that we're going to create a future is if we commit to each other. And you know why they did that? Braden Harper. Because Braden Harper went to the university where he worked with Indigenous peoples. He worked with other Indigenous youth leaders. He started to work and learn that Indigenous peoples are centrally one of the most important groups that we need to learn how to work with effectively. And he learned that from the University of Manitoba. And what he did is he took a chance. He took a risk, just like you're going to have a chance to do tomorrow. So tomorrow is not about feeling bad or woke or like whatever it is that we decide this week we want to say bad about Indigenous peoples and say, oh, well, it's just because we feel bad or guilty. You know what tomorrow's about? You having a job. Like when you wear an orange shirt tomorrow, what you are saying is that my future career as a lawyer, doctor, nurse, teacher, name every career you can possibly imagine. Let's try a few of them. Why would you need to know how to work with Indigenous peoples to be a carpenter? Anybody want to guess? Where's the wood come from to build the deck that you're going to build for people's backyards? Where does all the wood in Ontario come from? Softwood lumber. Comes from Treaty 3. Comes from Indigenous peoples, First Nations in that territory, who work with logging companies to be able to bring wood down to Southern Ontario so that you can build a deck. Okay, let's try this. If you're a lawyer, the most important decisions that are made around the Constitution, around businesses, and on Bay Street in Toronto is how effectively we can recognize Indigenous rights and work with people in order to make sure that projects are dealt with and fulfill the legal mandate to recognize and affirm Indigenous and treaty rights. That's everything. Pipelines, mines, the Ring of Fire, if you know what that is, if you're a person in Ontario, like this whole nuclear power movement. Let's try one of those. Let's try dentists. You think to yourself, oh, well, dentist, you don't need to know how to work with Indigenous peoples if you're a dentist. Well, if you are a dentist and you work with people, let's say from Attawapiskat or from, I don't know, Nipigon or from White Dog First Nation, wherever it might be. All those First Nations I just described to you have one time or another, Shoal Lake 40 in particular, been on boil water advisories. When you're on a boil water advisory as a First Nation, that means that your water is toxic to drink in your taps, if you have taps at all. Because the government has this thing called the Indian Act, which ensures that there's no infrastructure on First Nations, no businesses, no employment. This isn't something that people are lazy. It's a thing that people don't have any jobs. There's no jobs. You have no access on First Nations to have any employment, economic opportunities at all. Your schools, for example, also don't have computers in them, don't have access to resources like books and things like that, or you do have access to books, but not a lot of books. Here's my point, is that if you're growing up on that First Nation, you're not having access to a lot of opportunity to get a job. Second, or you're not having access to fresh water. So you go to the northern store, and you're like, okay, I got to buy some bottled water in order to wash myself, or to drink for my, for dinner, or to make dinner, or whatever. Now, the northern store is the only shop in town, and it's run by a company in a city like Toronto or Winnipeg, by the Northwest Company. Because they're the only store, they can charge you a crazy amount of money for boiled water, for bottled water. So they do. They charge you $80 for a case of water. But Coca-Cola, which is mass-produced cheaply, is about $10, $7 a can or a bottle. What are you going to drink? Are you going to drink water, or are you going to drink Coke? Most Indigenous kids are probably going to eat more chips, drink more Coke, eat more fast food, or food that's available very quickly, processed, than eating fresh fruit, because it's just what's available at the northern store. As a dentist, you're going to see these kids, and you're going to go, hey, how come you have more cavities than the kid from Etobicoke or from North York? Why is it that First Nations kids from Attawapiskat, Shoal Lake, they have more cavities? Oh, it's because they're on boil water advisories. So dentists should be, in order to do their job properly, should be leading the charge at the front of the march to help change the Indian Act, writing letters. I don't see a lot of dentists being activists. Here's my point, is that to be a competent dentist, you're going to need to know about the experiences of Indigenous peoples in this country too. I could keep going. My point of it is that tomorrow is your chance. Tomorrow is your chance to put on your orange shirt and say, this is important to me, not just because I'm learning about the past, but that you are stepping into the future. And the future is the future in which you are going to be able to build a future where you'll be employable anywhere in Ontario soon enough. If you cannot work effectively with Indigenous peoples, you will not be able to be competent. You'll not be employable. So here's your chance. There's lots of things you can do. Here's just a few lists of things you can do. Tomorrow's a really good chance to have a conversation with people. And I also realize you're going to realize something pretty interesting. You guys are having this conversation in schools. You've learned about certain things in this country, like residential schools, like also treaties. You've learned about things in this country, but your parents have not. So you're probably going to get a little frustrated with your parents, because they're going to say to you, hey, I never learned about that in school. Or worse, they're going to say, oh, I totally disagree with you. What I read on this website over here, or what I heard, or what I saw on a news program for 30 seconds one day led me to certain opinions. And you're going to be like, well, that's not quite right, because I learned about this in my social studies class, or geography class, or ELA class, and it's actually more like this. And you're going to realize that you are more competent than your parents on this issue. That's the thing that's really going to drive you nuts, is that on this issue, your parents don't know as much as you. And so you're going to be patient with them. You're going to be understanding, but you're also going to help nudge them a little bit. Say, hey, share the stuff that you're learning with your parents, and particularly your grandparents. Because your grandparents love you more than anything in the world. They want you to be the most effective employed person that you can be. They may not today think this is important, but I guarantee to you, once you explain it, they will start to see it. So tomorrow's about wearing an orange shirt, and it's about stepping up. It's about saying all of us are in this together. And I hope that what I did today is give you a view of not just the past about residential schools, not just about today, but also about how you have a role to play in the most important critical issue of this country, and it starts tomorrow with an orange shirt. So if you put that on tomorrow, I hope that I won't see you, I'll be in Ottawa, but I hope that you see each other. I hope that you show patience, kindness, and learn a little bit more tomorrow, and that when you step into the future, that you bring everybody together. Our job as Canadians, as Indigenous peoples, is don't give up on each other now. We've made huge steps for 10 years now. First time ever in history that we've ever done this. It's 10 years of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 5 years since we've had the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and now we need to do it more than ever. It's growing, it's a national movement. So miigwech everybody, and thank you very much for your time.